logo displayed on our website and at all of our meetings. If your company has any special announcements, we'll be glad to do announcements for you for meetings. We give you first dibs if you want to do a talk. So if you want to present one of these meetings and do a topic, we let our sponsors come in and do those. And we got Champion Technology Services here with us today, who is a sponsor, and we'll be doing the presentation today as well. So thank them. Just a quick heads up on some section meetings and events that are coming up in the not too distant future. A couple things, and I'll go into a little more detail on this, but this Sunday there's actually the Family Fun Eat and Run event, the third annual event for that. It's at the at City Park. Information on it and how to register is on our website. This is done through NOLA Running, so if any of y'all are runners, it's on the NOLA Running website. You can go in there and you can register. It's an event to raise money for the Children's Museum. So it's the new museum that's being built in City Park right now. They broke ground on it last year, and it'll be finished this year for the tricentennial. And then there's a North Shore Children's Museum that's in the works right now, and this raises money for that. And there's also a museum in Thibodaux. So this event raises about $50,000 a year for these children's museums, and it's done by PIPES. That's the Petroleum Industry that Promotes Education, which is an organization of several different organizations: API, Society of Women Engineers, Desks and Derricks. There's a Society of Geologists. There's a lot of people in the oil and gas industry form up this group to raise money for this event. So so come out and support that if you can. Our next meeting in May 8th, is going to be on engineering ethics. So if you're a PE and you need your 1-year ethics requirement, come on out to our meeting. We have Richard Savoy with Lapels will be coming in to do an engineering ethics presentation for us. And that'll be May 8th. And then in June, we have Nick Sands coming. So Nick, some of you may know him. He is he heads up standards for ISA. And he did some work. He works for DuPont and was doing some work in Laplace a few years ago. And he came and visited us quite often a couple years ago and was a keynote speaker at one of our honors and awards banquets. Really good guy. He's going to come out and talk to us just about standards updates. So he's going to come out and tell us what the hottest standards are, the most active standards in ISA, the ones that really have a lot of movement around them, such as the HMI 101 standard, the wireless standard, the new SCADA standards. There's quite a few standards out there that have got a lot of momentum behind them. So he's going to give us an update on those and talk about how you can participate in those standards to help develop them. And then Nick's going to stick around the next day, and he's going to do a course. This will be a pay-for course on June the 13th, and it's Introduction to Management of Alarm Systems. So that'll be a co-sponsored training that we're sponsoring with the ISA Society, and be a one-day class, so you can get your 8 PDHs out of that one, and some CEUs if you need CEUs. And I'll give you a little more detail on that to come. We have an open slot right now for July, so if you're interested in presenting, have a topic, let me know, and we'll put you on the calendar for July. And then in August, we have Paul Gruen coming in. Paul is going to be stepping into the society president role next year. He's out of Houston. He's a good friend of the section. He's done many presentations and symposiums for us in the years past on process safety, S84. So we're going to have him come in and give us kind of a twofer. We'll get a society as a whole update, and then get him to tell us what's new and happening with the ISA 84 standard as well. Sponsor announcement. So we have some flyers up on the front here, but there is a Rockwell Automation, one of our sponsors, has a Solutions Expo on this week, Thursday, at the process training unit in Gonzales. So that's if you've never been there to the PTU, it's at Trinova's facility in Gonzales. They do a lot of training on instrumentation there, and then it's got a lot of automation technology there as well. So we're doing a Solutions Expo that day, and the topics, it'd be kind of a 10 to 5, but it's one of these things where you just kind of show up, attend a couple sessions, and then the sessions are triplicated. So there's a session that'll be done in the morning, mid-afternoon, late afternoon, and then they'll be repeated. But there's sessions on energy management, process control, process safety, various things. So we have flyers up there, and feel free to sign up for that. Again, this is that information on that family fun eat and run event. So just the specifics there. It is this Sunday, starting at 7 a.m. It's a great event for kids. So they have a 5K run walk starting at 8:30, and then at 9:30 there's a kids fun run and walk. So it's a real great event. And the way this is set up, there's a lot of food sponsors. So it's a lot of people in the industry that are really good at cooking gumbos and all sorts of the kind of food fare that you get at these golf tournaments is the kind of food fare that you have here. So the food is really good. Real best kept secret of this event. But so come on out, gorge yourself, and go run a 5K. So another announcement is kind of in theme with today, cybersecurity. Houston is pretty much dedicating the entire month of May to cybersecurity, and they've come up with a cybersecurity training camp program. So these are all pay-for courses from ISA that are being held in various locations in Houston. But if any of these courses are of interest to you, and you happen to be in the Houston area or want to make a trip to the Houston area, that's what's going on there. So we'll put links to these on our website so that you can get to them, but you can also get to them from isa.org. And then again, just to mention again that on Wednesday, June 13th, the day after Nick Sands does the presentation for our group at our monthly meeting, he'll be doing this one-day course on the introduction to the management of alarm systems. So I know a lot of end users out there have pretty significant alarm rationalization programs to kind of rationalize alarms, make alarms make sense, and not inundate operators with unnecessary alarms, making sure that they just get the alarms they need to act and do the work. So if you want to learn about alarm management and the way to do it, then this would be a great event to attend. There is an early bird sign up, so if you sign up for this event by April 30th, there's a 5% discount that you get. All right, and then with that, I will turn it over to Champion Technology Services. We have two guys here, Joe Driver and William Sulzer from Champion Technology Services. Both of them have been certified by ISA on the cybersecurity standard. And so they're going to come talk to you about the certification process and the value it has for their customers and what it entails.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Joe Driver. I am the corporate application engineer for Champion Corporate out of Baton Rouge. We kind of started this push a few years ago to we've been getting a lot of feedback from our customers about, cybersecurity. What is it? How can it help us? Is it something we really need to do? So we decided to make an effort as a company that I've been leading on getting some of our guys certificates on cybersecurity, and to introduce that as a new offering to our customers. So I'm just a little background on myself. I graduated from LSU, electrical engineering. I've been working in automation. I was an automation engineer for 10 years. I moved to this corporate role last year, but I still do still like to get my hands dirty with the technical stuff every now and then. And I'll let William introduce himself.
So my name is William Sulzer. I've been with Champion for about 7 years now. I am an LSU grad and got my degree in computer engineering. So kind of found Champion through a co-op program and realized that there was this whole industrial automation thing out there, and kind of fell in love with it. So stuck around with them. But about the beginning of last year, probably around January or so, I actually started working on all the 4 certificates. Well, 5 if you include, after you do all the 4, you kind of automatically get the 5th one. But I've done all the certificates for ISA's cybersecurity. I think it's IC 32, 33, 34, and 37. So yeah, that's pretty much about me.
All right, so moving on. The agenda for this presentation. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define cybersecurity, especially relate to industrial control systems. Like this standard, that ISA has worked on is specifically tailored for industrial control systems. So the entire thing is tailored to what we do. And a lot of the thing is that people come to me is they hear the term cybersecurity a lot, but they don't know what all it entails. So we're going to discuss that a little bit. Then I like to kind of go over some recent cybersecurity events, just things that we're hearing in the news, just describe that a little bit to everybody and see these things are hitting pretty close to home. And, a lot of people are like, oh, this will never happen to me, or, our system's not on the internet, so we don't have to worry about it. But you'd be really surprised at how many vulnerabilities that a lot of these sites that we're working with have. Then afterwards, I'm going to hand it over to William. We're going to review the ISA 6443 cybersecurity life cycle, and so that life cycle starts with the assessment of industrial control systems, the implementation of these cybersecurity measures, the implementation and the maintenance of these cybersecurity. Cybersecurity isn't something that it's one and done, and then you just don't worry about it again. It's a cycle. Once you put in all these countermeasures, technology is always changing. Malicious people are always finding new ways to, exploit and get vulnerabilities on our system. So you constantly have to reassess and then go back. So once you're done with that, your implementation and maintenance, part of the cycle is you're gonna have to do another assessment. It's constantly updating. Once you put one patch, Windows patch in your computer, you're not done forever. Microsoft is always releasing new stuff, and so we got to be diligent. We have to keep up with it and make sure we're following the cycle. Then afterwards, at the end of the presentation, we're just gonna ask for any questions. I think we're gonna cut the presentations kind of a little bit short to give some time at the end. So if you guys have any questions about the life cycle or the certificate program, you just ask us and we can go over it. But basically, this presentation, we really just want to give an overview. This isn't going to give you a certificate or you won't pass the test from this presentation, but just to give you guys an overview of the cybersecurity and the life cycle itself. So the definition. So basically, like I said, people are becoming aware of cybersecurity. They may not know what it is, but they're seeing it in the news. Emails are getting hacked. Systems are getting compromised, you're losing availability, data's being stolen. So from that, people are just coming to us. I'm sure a lot of you have been somebody who reached out to you to just kind of ask, like, okay, what kind of things do we need to do? And, as far as control systems are related. So basically, ISA and IEC have developed a set of standards. So this standard is co-developed by ISA and IEC. They decided, originally it had a different name. It wasn't 6443. So that's not really, a lot of the other ISA standards don't have that naming convention. That's because they're adopting the same name. They want to make this a global standard. They want to make sure that everybody, in the United States, Europe, whatever, we're all using the same standards for cybersecurity as it relates to industrial control systems. So, so this is to help us. And the thing is that, as system integrators, what we wanted to do is we wanted to, we're offering a PLC or DCS system to our customers. We don't just want to put that out there. We want to also say, there's these cybersecurity standards. Let's design from the inception with cybersecurity in mind. Let's make sure we think about all these vulnerabilities and exploits that could happen. And as we're doing, our factory acceptance tests, we also do a cybersecurity factory acceptance test at the same time. So, the best way to harden your system is while you're designing it. If you design and segregate your system in a manner to where you have cybersecurity in mind, it leads to having a more robust cybersecurity countermeasures. And so the goals here is basically I wanted to say with this is that there's no, okay, here's a book, do all these things and you're 100% protected. You never have to worry. The reality of it is that it's one of those things. It's all about calculated risk. It's like it is with safety. You could think of every possible scenario, but it's kind of an exponential growth, the amount of money and amount of resources that you can put in this investment. But at some point you have to sit there and think, okay, we've done all this. Anything that's left out there, is that acceptable? If you go through the life cycle and, one of the steps is doing a risk analysis. And during that risk analysis, you have to sit and think about, okay, this is a risk with our process right now. Is this acceptable or not? Can we tolerate this particular risk? If not, then let's do something to bring that down to a tolerable level. So you may not have to completely eliminate or remove that risk, but let's bring it down to a level that we all know that is acceptable for the site. So every site is going to have different risk levels, as it is, it's very similar to the safety life cycle as well. So a question I get asked a lot is, why use the ISA standard? Because there's already IT cybersecurity standards. Well, I can tell you firsthand. So one of the things that, we all know that if you get your business network is compromised or somebody gains access to it, there are consequences. There's both financial consequences, commercial, data being lost. But if an industrial control system is compromised, you normally end up with a lot more dire consequences. So there's a recent breach that I'm going to talk about with the safety system. Somebody hacks your emails and all of your company's emails are ripped out. That is a definite loss. But if somebody goes into your Triconics and disables your safety system that's protecting a reactor, that could lead to catastrophic events. You're no longer protected. Something could happen. You could lead to explosion, loss of life, damage of property, and environmental consequences as well. So the the consequences are a lot more dire in that regard. Also is that control systems, a lot of control systems use proprietary languages, protocols, communication paths that most IT, trained people aren't really familiar with. We have our Modbus, our Profinet, our our different proprietary Rockwell, Siemens communication protocols. They all have their own set of needs that, especially trained personnel will need to know the different requirements for those. And then, like I said, the hardware and the protocols are different. So, I've had, a lot of IT companies or lots of IT personnel come to me and they're like, okay, we need to install virus scanners on these devices in here. And I open it up and, it's a Siemens PLC. And I'm like, well, that's not exactly how PLCs work. There's no software I can install on that for a virus scanner. There's ways to protect it, but, so you have to be familiar with the hardware that you're trying to protect to know the best way to protect it. The other thing is, so one of the things they teach you about in the certificate program is AIC versus CIA priority. So the CIA stands for, the C is confidentiality. So confidentiality means the data that you have available, you don't want anybody to see that data. Integrity is that the data that you have available on your system, you want to make sure that that data is what it should be. It hasn't been tampered with, it hasn't been changed. And then the availability is my data available? Can I see it? So in an IT world, the CIA priority. Confidentiality is the top priority with most IT-based cybersecurity programs and policies. They want to make sure that all of the trade secrets, any sort of confidential data, nobody can see that. Well, when it comes to control systems, if we have, if I'm reading a temperature on a reactor, it's important to me to be able to see it. But if somebody else can read the temperature of that reactor, it's not really going to hurt the business. There may be some trade secrets with that, but our priority really with control systems is availability. I want to make sure that my PLC and my operators can see those values. And then integrity. I want to make sure that all the data that they're reading from the control system has not been tampered with, and it is the exact readings. And then confidentiality is the lowest priority. It's still a high priority, but if you had to pick the three in the order, availability is definitely the highest priority when it comes to industrial control systems. So that mentality is kind of different. So you may, the way you protect your system and the way you set up your firewalls and the way you set up access to it, you're focusing to make sure that you have high availability and high integrity as opposed to confidentiality. A lot of these protocols that we use, they don't encrypt the data being sent between devices. There is a push to encrypt that, but really it's more of we're not focusing on making sure somebody can't read the values that are being passed across the network. It's more of we want to make sure that we have a high availability with our control systems. Also, I kind of think that whoever designs and implements these systems are really the best ones to build in these cybersecurity measures from the beginning. A system that is designed from the start with cybersecurity in mind is going to be more robust and have more countermeasures thought about and brought in than a system where cybersecurity was an afterthought. If you design the whole system up front, a lot of the times, I'm guilty of this. The first thing that we want to do when we design a system is like, I don't care about security. I don't care about passwords. I just want to make sure everything works. So, you go in there, your OPC, you open it up to everybody, or, you set your passwords or set the default, because when we're designing the system, when we go and do our factory acceptance tests and our site acceptance tests, we want to make sure that everything's working, So we have a tendency to make things a lot more open than they need to be. So if we're thinking about cybersecurity up front during that design and implementation, we can go ahead and patch a lot of those holes up front. And also, just another note is Kaspersky, which we were kind of laughing about this other day because their software is now banned in the United States, but they did do a report a couple years ago that for companies over 500 employees, they estimate about $500,000 a year in losses due to cybersecurity related incidents. And this was in the last 12 months, 54% of these. So a lot of these incidents are more common than you think. A lot of people, when they think about cybersecurity, they're thinking about, some kid in the basement in a hoodie hacking away on his computer trying to get access. But really, cybersecurity can be anything from, there's an unauthorized user that walked into our server room and accidentally shut off, one of our DCS servers, or the operator plug. I see this a lot. Operators plug their iPhones into the control station, and now whatever their hunting pictures are now on the operator station, along with whatever viruses they had on their computers. Even those weren't intentional attacks; those are cybersecurity incidents. So we have to think about that. A lot of the things that people come and they say is, well, we're not on the internet. Our control system's completely isolated. Well, that has some good with it, but it also has some faults with it as well. If all of your Windows machines are not on the internet, that means when was the last time you got Windows updates? So you have to think about those. Everything that we do, it has a risk with it. So we can't just think that, just because we can't get access to the outside world, that we're protected as a cybersecurity stance. There's other threats that we have to think about within the company. Some intentional, but a lot of them are just unintentional ways to compromise the system. So some recent events. So one I talked about earlier was the Hatman Triconics vulnerability. Basically, this is a targeted attack against a Triconic safety system. I received an email from Schneider, and basically what this does is this allows a compromised computer, if this computer is on the same network as your Triconic safety system, that computer could just push out any data it wants and overwrite memory inside your Triconics. So your set points, your reactor shutdown safe set points, or your CIFs. You're pretty much invalidating all your CIFs right there when you're writing these set points. And this can be done from a computer, and if that computer becomes compromised, then it could just sit out data, and then depending on the attack vector or whoever decided to set this up, they can modify that program however they see fit. Another one that was pretty popular in the news last year was the WannaCry ransomware. This affected around 200,000 systems, and it prevented access to PCs. So basically what this did is this was basically an exploit. It was discovered by Microsoft a few months before. It was discovered and patched by Microsoft in March. So basically, if your computer, like I said, if you just had your weekly Windows update in March, you're protected. But you can see easily 200,000 systems were infected within a couple of days, that a lot of people don't keep their computers up to date. And what this did is it actually encrypted all the data on your computer so you couldn't access it. And if the attack group, what they wanted to do is they wanted you to send them some money, and they would give you the password to unlock your own computer. I think they ended up making like $20,000, $30,000, which that. But the fact is that there were 200,000 systems. They targeted the healthcare system, infrastructure. There was railroad systems, subway, metro type systems that were attacked. And they thought if they could bring down that infrastructure, that these people would be willing to pay whatever it took. Especially getting access to medical records. People really need to see that data for healthcare professionals. And like I said, the only way, the quickest way, the easiest way to fix that was just to run the Windows update from March. Just a small download, took a few seconds, and then you're protected against it. We were lucky in the United States that some very diligent cybersecurity researchers were able to find a way to kind of contain the attack, so it didn't really migrate our way. But when it was happening, I was definitely watching the news because I knew that I was just feeling that I was going to have to start having my USB drive with that patch on it and just start running out the sites and start patching everything. But I did send out a lot of warning emails to some of our larger customers to say, hey, you might want to patch your computer just in case, because you imagine, it shuts down hospitals and infrastructure, what it would do to a control system. How much money would your sites lose if all of your DCS computers were completely locked up? Operators couldn't make changes. They, safely, you can't operate the plant. So a lot of times we would have to shut down until everything could be fixed. And so, that's lost revenue, and it's a lot of man hours to get that patched up and fixed. And it's, it's easily fixed. There's a way to easily avoid it. This other one is the Meltdown Spectre vulnerabilities. With that hasn't been a targeted attack yet, but I just like talking about it because it's an interesting type of vulnerability. The security researchers found that on any Intel and some AMD processors released in the past couple of years, you could have an application on the PC that could run, and it would have access to pretty much any memory within the computer. And this is a problem, is that in Windows, most modern operating systems, each application's memory, the data that application has, is protected for that application. But allowing some other software could go in there and read data out of there. You could see, you could find passwords, you could read, confidential data. You could even overwrite that data. And, if you're sending set points, you could change those set points being sent out to your system. So this was actually a hardware level vulnerability. Trying to find patches to that damage really itself, but really the way that they've done to fix it so far is they have to disable some of these, a lot of CPUs use these different little tricks to try to increase performance. So they actually had to turn a lot of those little performance boosting tactics off to avoid this vulnerability. So a lot of, I got a lot of calls from, data center type machines. After the patches were installed, it reduced performance, greatly. So really this vulnerability is still out there. Microsoft has released patches. AMD and Intel have both released firmware updates, for motherboards to try to reduce that risk. But right now, the only true way to fix it is for Intel to redesign their processors and release. I think the next generation of Intel processors will not have this issue. Yes, yeah, exactly what it is. And since it's a hardware level exploit, it's not as easy as the WannaCry, where it's the software thing. It could just be patched like that. That's not a design flaw in the silicon itself. This other one is the Triton SIS attack. So this was very similar to the Triconix vulnerability. This was another Triconix system. This attack, I got another email from Schneider about this. They were kind of, whenever they send out these emails describing that there was a vulnerability there attack, they don't want to give too many details on it. They don't want people to recreate it, or they don't want to know which sites were the ones that were compromised. But basically what happened is somebody got access through some outside vector. They were able to get a computer infected on that network, and that computer basically reprogrammed the PLC, the safety PLC. So their SIS PLC was reprogrammed without the operators knowing it, and they didn't have the protections. And so basically, luckily, it shut down the PLC. So they were able to notice that they weren't protected, but the original intent, they could tell, somebody was trying to change the functionality of their safety functions without them knowing it. So, they could have overpressured a vessel, or, had catastrophic results. So that was definitely a malicious intent. They don't know if it was for, the motivation for that person. Some people are doing it just because they can. So that's definitely something to look out. And that's as recent, as December. So these things are always ongoing. I kind of just called out. I really like the ones that focus on the safety systems, because those are the ones that are there for our protection. If they remove our protection, then, what do we have in mind? So they actually, part of the cybersecurity program actually has, you're really supposed to segregate and separate your safety system into its own, they call it a zone. You have that safety zone and you isolate that. And so it has a higher level of protection than the rest of your system. So that's definitely something. So I just like bringing these up to know that, this is pretty common. Everybody knows about Stuxnet. That kind of jumped off a lot of this industrial control system cybersecurity stuff. But, ever since Stuxnet was kind of like the big neon sign saying, hey, all you hackers out there, there's control systems out there, and control systems engineers don't like to lock down their systems. So it kind of became a calling for, oh, we can do more damage attacking, power infrastructure, water systems, energy companies than, let's just, hacking emails from Fox or whatever. So moving on. So ICS CERT. So this is the CERT is the Cybersecurity Emergency Response Team. This is a part of the Department of Homeland Security. They have a group that's dedicated to industrial control systems. Their website is ics-cert.gov. If you go there, you'll be surprised. You can type in any manufacturer. Anyone that you can think of, you can type it in, and you can see a list of current vulnerabilities and exploits on their systems right now. I was just looking this morning, and one of the most common PLCs we use is a Rockwell ControlLogix, and they have at the top of the list, so like, here's a known exploit with ControlLogix processors. So it's good to go there and look. They have all the manufacturers are working together with this group, and they're sending them, okay, we found this exploit. This is how we fix it. This is how you get around it. This is how you mitigate it. And ICS CERT, the website, is a really good resource and database. So I definitely, for any of you who are more curious about this, go to this website. It's ics-cert.gov. Just check it out and just search. Just look at some of the stuff that you have. You'll really be surprised at the amount of exploits and vulnerabilities that are out there. But the ICS CERT group also they do audits to see where is our infrastructure weak as far as cybersecurity. And during last year's audit, they found out that these rankings change every year. Now the number one most prevalent weakness is boundary protection. We have a lot of our control systems that we have uplinks into our business networks or our plant land. We want to get data up to our information systems. Well, that boundary protection is where they're seeing the weakness, and not just we don't have a firewall between our control system and our business network. But one of the things we have to think about is like, okay, we put all these countermeasures in, and we just sit there. Well, how do we know if somebody tried to attempt to access our system? Knowing that what's going on is a very big, important part of cybersecurity. So we need to know, there's systems and software and hardware dedicated to monitoring your network for any abnormal activity, and it'll send out alarms, email responses. So making sure that activity is logged and that people are monitoring that log was a huge weakness. And then some of it, moving on, is just identification, authentication. Like I said, we like to use that default password to log into things. Allocation of resource is that part of the, when you develop your cybersecurity policy, there needs to be people who are dedicated, or not 100% dedicated, but people who have roles with maintaining the system. So making sure that when those people aren't there, say, oh, we just aren't protected around our cybersecurity when Joe's on vacation. Physical access control is a big part of industrial control system cybersecurity that a lot of people don't think about. Let's make sure that unauthorized users cannot gain access to our server rooms or to our PLC cabinets or to any sort of a system that needs high availability. Let's not just have it on the floor in the corner of a room where anybody can walk by and accidentally kick it, turn it off, or get on there accidentally. I was at a site a couple of weeks ago, and they had their engineering station and one of their computers that they use for doing invoicing, surprisingly, were both stacked on top of each other, and there was a KVM where you could hit a button they shared a monitor. And one of their administration personnel went back there, and she was on the computer just opening up stuff, trying to get on the internet, and just start clicking through stuff. And I'm just sitting there watching her, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" She goes, "Oh, I'm trying to open up my spreadsheet to fill out some numbers for this month." And I go, "Well, you're on the wrong computer right now." And so that's something like she had no idea. If she would have opened up the PLC programming software, I don't know what would have happened, but we need to make sure that people don't accidentally get into things that that they really shouldn't get into. Account management, that's really making sure we have passwords that expire and we have good password policies. And least functionality is really what that is, just rogue internal access. And so that's really, like I said before, people trying. And a lot of times we'll have people who think they know everything, oh, I can get on there and I can make this change to this ladder logic. But we need to make sure that the people that are allowed to make changes to the system, they all know they have the security and permission set up to allow them to do that, and then we keep everybody else out if we can. So I'm gonna hand it over to William now, and he's gonna go over the 3 phases of the cybersecurity lifecycle.
All right. So as Joe was saying, you know, the set of standards that kind of are encompassed in 62443 are way too vast to go over in, you know, I got less than 30 minutes now. So what we'll do is we'll talk about kind of a good thing to extract from that is the actual cybersecurity life cycle. And the idea with this is that it, you know, a lot of people, they try and approach the standard and it's just this real dense thing and you got to read through it all and try and figure out how to apply it to you. So it's easiest to kind of strip away all the details so that and just show you what the skeleton of this looks like to kind of see how you would approach it. So they break it down into 3 distinct phases: assessment, development, and implementation, and then maintenance. And as you can see, you know, all the arrows point to the next one, and it's just this circle. Because like Joe was saying, once you enter in this maintain phase, you know, cybersecurity is not this static thing. It's always changing. There are always new vulnerabilities and new threats, new threat actors. So every now and then you need to reassess. So you'll have to loop back to that and kind of repeat the cycle. So the focus of the assess phase is to find vulnerabilities by performing an actual risk assessment and kind of spitballing what some of the countermeasures will look like. Then you move more into the implementation, and you use that assessment. That document is called a cyber risk assessment. You use that assessment to actually design and kind of flesh out actually what you would want to implement based on those risks and how you would kind of remediate them. And then with that design, then you implement it. And then after that, you enter in the maintenance phase. And like I said, it's a never-ending process. So you always need to be making sure that you are adhering to the design specifications that you set for your site, and that you are also taking into account any new things that pop up in the ecosystem. So first up, assessment. Like I was saying, the purpose of this is to identify and analyze the what the ISA calls the system under consideration. That's going to be your system. It could be your entire facility. It could be just a specific unit within your facility. But just analyzing the system under consideration for threats and vulnerabilities and to calculate its risks. And then the output of this phase is going to be the cyber risk assessment, which is going to be a document that should be, you know, it's a living document. It should be maintained. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk about kind of what the 3 areas of the assessment phase go over. So first, you start with a high-level cyber risk assessment. Then you kind of use the knowledge that you gained here to help allocate your control system assets into security zones or conduits. And then from there, you develop your detailed cyber risk assessment. So your high-level risk assessment, the entire goal of this is mostly to help you understand your system and to help you understand the impacts of what would happen if you lost your system. So you want to understand the worst case financial, health, safety, and environmental consequences that result in a loss of availability or a loss in integrity or in confidentiality because your control system is compromised. Once you go through that procedure, you know, you should start developing a better idea of what the thing you're considering looks like. And to flesh that out, what you're going to want to do is allocate your assets within that system into what the ISA calls zones and conduits. So a zone is just a group of assets, and it's usually based on the results of your high-level assessment, but it can also be based on similar functionality or similar criticality or even location. So just kind of any delimiter that you want to use. You know, there's no specific thing that you have to use. It's just kind of what makes sense for you. And then the conduits. Sorry, the conduits are the links between the zones. So those are the 2 main aspects that we consider whenever we are doing more of a detailed risk assessment is each zone and each conduit between the zones. So when you have that allocated, then you move into your detailed cyber risk assessment. And this is going to look more like a PHA or a HAZOP. It's not just going to be the IT nerds getting in a room together and saying, okay, well, this thing is really vulnerable because we've got all the ports blown open. It's not going to work like that. You actually need to get all of your subject matter experts from all areas, all disciplines across the system. You need your safety people, you need operations, production. You need everybody, so that everyone can unite and actually kind of assess these threats and the vulnerabilities and the consequences of these risks happening and the likelihoods of these risks happening. So you all get together, a couple of days or however long it takes, and then the output of that is going to be your final cybersecurity risk assessment report. And this is going to be the document that's going to actually feed your design and implementation that you actually want to put in to help protect you from the risks that you just identified. So next, we've got the design and implementation phase. So again, you're going to use this cyber risk assessment that you just developed. That's going to be the foundation for developing your cybersecurity requirement specification, which is basically the output of this phase, or really the midpoint. And then once you have your requirement specification, then you're actually going to implement it and validate it against the requirements. So as you can see, they've the flow chart continues down into this phase, and we have our requirement specification, design and engineering of cybersecurity countermeasures. Those two kind of happen in tandem with the design and development of other means of risk reduction for the system. And then finally, those all merge down into installation, commissioning, and validation of the cybersecurity countermeasures. So the design and engineering of your countermeasures, very similar to how in the risk assessment phase you started out with something high level and you worked your way down into a detailed thing. It's basically going to be the same approach. So using your risk assessment, you're first going to develop a conceptual design that focuses on assigning risks with actual what are called target security levels, and then also recommendations for improving those levels. So a security level is basically you develop a criticality matrix, and your two sides of your matrix are going to be the likelihood of something happening and then the severity of that thing happening. So of course, as you increase on both axes, the further down you are over here, that's basically the worse this thing is going to be if it actually happens, and the farther up you are, then it's not going to be so bad. Because all the risks that you have identified, they're not all equal, right? There's different risk associated with flying blind whenever you're trying to control a reaction, or whether or not you leave a completely isolated computer unlocked when all it has is like word processing installed on it. So those are two different weights of risks. So once you define all of your target security levels and kind of get some rough recommendations for improving them, then you're actually going to move into your detailed design. You're going to elaborate on that conceptual one and actually start to figure out how to reduce the levels that you just found to what are going to be tolerable numbers that you're going to figure out for your situation. So there's no hard and fast like, okay, well, this particular risk always has to be a 6. It's always very specific to the site. So those numbers have to kind of be developed on your own, and it just every case is different. So then during your detailed design, you're going to figure out exactly what countermeasures you're going to need to employ to bring those numbers down into tolerable levels. So once you do that, basically all the documentation that you have built up to this point, from the risk assessment, your zone and conduit diagrams, any network architecture diagrams that you've put in, any other kind of thing like that, you're going to combine all of that into your cybersecurity requirement specification. And this is going to be your document that basically governs how you implement things in your system from this point forward, whether it's, you know, you're putting in this brand new system, it's greenfield, or you are working a year from now and it's considered brownfield and you're putting in new stuff, but you still need to adhere to that. So this requirement specification is kind of going to be the site's cybersecurity Bible. So from that, once you have that established and everybody agrees on it, then you can move into the and all of that. So you're going to install the architecture and the countermeasures and any hardware that y'all agreed upon in design, and then you're going to actually verify the system through testing. As Joe mentioned, you know, usually you do a factory acceptance test that's off process, and then you do a site acceptance test process. And this testing needs to be happening with whatever other testing is being done with the system. So if you're putting in a new PLC and you're testing new controls, you need to do your cybersecurity testing before you execute that testing. Because if you do it afterwards, then you can't prove that your cybersecurity was in place to prevent other things from happening. So you need to make sure that all of your access rules are in place so that only the engineer can go online with the PLC and make changes, things like that. So that testing needs to happen off process first in a factory acceptance environment, and then you do the same thing in a site acceptance environment. But again, the idea is you want to validate the system that you have just put in against this cybersecurity requirement specification that you developed. Which brings us into basically what happens after we've implemented, and that's going to be maintenance. Because again, this thing never ends, so you got to keep up with it. So the life cycle has to accommodate the fact that cybersecurity is always changing. There are always new threats and vulnerabilities. So you need to develop maintenance plans to ensure that your requirement specification is enforced, and that not only if you put in new stuff, it adheres to the specification, but also that your existing configuration is still functioning. And then the second part is you need to develop an incident response plan ahead of time so that stakeholders are prepared in case an incident does happen. So the final part of the flow chart here, we've got cybersecurity maintenance, monitoring, and management of change, and then cyber incident response and recovery. So for maintenance, monitoring, and management of change, like I was saying, you need to develop a maintenance plan. It's going to be specific for site. There's no catch-all that's just going to work for everybody. So it can include patch management. It can include system hardening, which is basically locking down functionality to only what you need, rather than kind of blowing everything open. Malware scan, and even something as that may cleaning, but you know, if you are working in a coke plant or a carbon black plant, you know, all of your stuff probably gets pretty dirty, and if you let that build up, then you could have you know, some kind of environmental failure of your servers, which is still considered cybersecurity. So those are things that you need to think about. On top of that, on top of your maintenance plan, you need to have a system for monitoring everything that you've put in and everything that exists out there, because you need to be able to detect abnormal activity right when it happens. You know, you don't want to wait until after everything has run its course, only then to figure out, oh, well, everything was messing up over the weekend because we had a virus that started on this computer and then snaked its way all the way through the rest of the system. You want to know right when that virus was detected on that first computer so that you can be proactive and try and contain it and prevent it from spreading. So you need to monitor basically all of the cyber type activities that are going on at your site. And mostly that's going to include log capture and review. Review being an important part, because like Joe was saying, it's not just about putting in the system and letting it go. There needs to be an active form of maintenance on this thing. You have someone who is periodically going in and looking at logs, even if they're exception logs. You know, they don't have to be debug logs where you have to make sure every single line in this 50,000 page log file is right. You can still capture just exceptions logs and monitor those. But you do need to actually view them, or else they're worthless. And then also periodic testing and auditing as a part of it, because you need to make sure that any access lists that you might have put in a switch are actually still functioning, and that no one has gone in there and made some errant misconfiguration, or maybe you got on a Cisco switch and you made some changes and you forgot to write memory, which saves the active configuration into the startup configuration. So then if the switch reboots, then you've lost what you've changed. So those types of things. And then finally, you need a management of change policy for the control system, so that whenever you put in new configuration and new hardware, it's adhering to the requirement specification that you laid out. But also, whenever you decommission or demolish things, if you take out a server and you had certain policies in place that allowed a user to access a certain IP address via remote desktop, you need to make sure that if you remove that computer, you demo all of the configuration associated with it, not just the computer itself. Because if 2 years down the line, IT is going through and they have a new box they want to put in, so let's go look at the IP spreadsheet that we have and see what we can assign it, and they put in this new one. Well, it turns out there's already configuration that allows remote access to this box, and no one knows. So you need to make sure that if any changes that you make, whether it's additions or removals, that you're accounting for them. And then finally, the last section here, the cyber incident and response recovery. This is actually kind of its own miniature life cycle within this life cycle, but you can see it's also cyclic, because after every incident, you have hopefully learned something that you can implement to prevent it from happening again. But it does start at planning. So part of your planning is going to be things like making sure that you have, who do you call when something happens? You have to make sure you have all the phone numbers. Everybody knows kind of the order of execution of how you approach this thing. You need to make sure that you're actually taking backups, because there's nothing worse than realizing that you need to restore a backup and then going over to your network storage over there and seeing that you actually haven't taken a backup in 6 months because that backup machine was powered off for whatever reason. So you need to make sure that you actually have backups and a backup plan. And then the next phase here is incident prevention. So anything that you have potentially learned from prior incidents, or the things that you have outlined as vulnerabilities and threats in your requirement specification, what do we need to do to prevent those things from happening? Those are going to be captured there. And then kind of the resting state of this is detection, where you are sitting there basically waiting for something to happen. And this is kind of where the log monitoring ties back in, because you might not necessarily know someone has got into this computer unless it is actually captured by some kind of host intrusion detection system or network intrusion detection system that you have set up. So this detection, whether it's automatic or via something has to catch that. And then that's going to basically trigger the rest of the life cycle here. And that's going to start with containment. So obviously the first thing you want to do is contain the thing. And you might think initially that is power off the machine, if it is like a virus or something, but that's actually not the best recommended action. You want to actually contain it, isolate it from everything else, but you want to leave it on, because a lot of times you'll have viruses or any kind of malicious code will actually be in memory. And the second you turn that machine off and reboot it, it gets wiped away. So you have no ability to execute forensics on the back end here. So the first thing you want to do is contain the issue. And then once it's contained, then you need to work on how to remediate it. So it may be running patches to remove the virus, or what have you, but there's going to be some step to actually deal with this quarantine area that you have. And then after you have guaranteed remediation, then you can figure out how to recover and restore the system to where it previously was. It may be to re-image a laptop or a DCS server or something like that. or it could be to stand switches back up, anything. So then after that step, you're going to move into forensics. And this is where you're going to figure out what happened, why it happened, how it happened, who did it, those things. You may not be able to find all the answers, but hopefully the goal is that you can find something that you can feed back into the beginning here for planning so that you can guarantee or at least reduce the risk of the thing happening again. So that's basically it. That's all three phases of the life cycle: assess, implement, design and implementation, and then maintenance. So from this point, we can open the floor up to any questions that anybody has. Yes.
The 62.443 have any sort of tools like templates?
So that is actually the question that back when I was taking the courses in all four of the classes, I actually asked that exact same question. And the problem is, because everything is so customized to every site, it's hard for the ISA to recommend something, because if they recommend something, then people are going to take that as that's all that I need to do. So they don't really have any. They can kind of recommend tools, like there's the I forget what it stands for, but there's CSET. I think it's a government vulnerability scan utility. But I mean, there are all kinds of asset management tools out there and vulnerability management tools that will actually actively scan your system.
No, I don't mean that. I mean, you outline, both of you outline the process that you have to go through to protect, to have your system
Yes.
have confidence in. There are a number of manual things that people have to do, and certainly there must be some outline as to how you do these things, because after all, one of you said in the very beginning that the goal is to have this worldwide standard. Everybody does it the same way. So if you don't have some agreed upon guide, or templates or something like that, it's impossible. It's never going to happen.
Right. So, I mean, going back to like the risk assessment, I was talking about how you can have a criticality matrix to kind of figure out how risky your risks are. The ISA doesn't provide a matrix to actually do that for you. And again, it goes back to, it really depends on, it's something that the site itself has to decide on to figure out what the best approach is for them. It's kind of unfortunate, but
yeah. So so first thing, just a little disclaimer. This standard is really new. Like I think when we took the first, it wasn't even finally ratified yet. So but the standard is more of, this is what you need to do, but they don't get down to this is how you do it. Like, you need to segregate your system, but they won't tell you this is how you configure your firewall. So it's more of the process is what the standard is on itself. Like, so there are, like, if you're going through assessment phase, they say, okay, first you need to get an inventory of everything you have. The inventory needs to include all of your computers and everything on that, but they don't have a template for that document, for what an inventory document has. But there is a clear flow chart of what you do to go through each step. We didn't go through it because this was 11 days of training that we can, kind of condense down. But so they tell you what you need to do. They just don't tell you how exactly you have to do it, because it depends on your system and what your level, your risk levels are.
That's a big gap in this whole process. Yeah.
Okay.
Web guys couldn't hear the last question. So.
Yeah, to that, I mean, with ISA standards, a lot of the first standards usually is the, and TRs come later. The technical come later, which is the hows, right?
Still working on the TRs for the 6443, because like I said, it wasn't even finalized. We took the first class before the last class was even finished. It was pretty funny because we went and we were taking the fundamentals class. We asked our instructor what was going to be in the test, and he was like, "I don't know. I haven't taken." He said, "I don't know. I haven't taken it yet." So it was a very interesting study session. Any other questions?
Well,
yeah.
I guess the punchline is therein lies an opportunity for some enterprising consultant or something?
Absolutely. One of the classes that I took, I think it was the assessment class. The guy who was teaching it was actually he was a cybersecurity consultant, and he would actually go through this document and help you do your risk assessment and help you put together your cybersecurity requirement specification because it is just so dense. So.
And so some of these, it's kind of like doing a PHA or HAZOP. You have to do this with your cybersecurity as well. So what we, just as champion, what we could do is or any other consultant that's trained in this, is they can come and help facilitate the process for you. I can't tell you what your risk levels are, but I can help you determine that you need risk levels and, how to say, something like, oh, an operator left this computer unlocked, this may be a risk level 1. Well, what is a risk level 1? Well, a risk level 1 to you is going to be different than a risk level 1 to, on another site. So we could sit there and facilitate the process and, help you determine, it's kind of like your financial advisor. The first thing they make you fill out is what's your level of investment risk. It's kind of like that. It's going to be different for every site and for every, every facility has, and every system, some different systems within the same facility may have different risk levels associated with them.
What you're describing is a very high level template.
Yeah.
And that's all I'm asking is.
Sorry. Yeah, so that high level thing, it is spelled out in the courses themselves and people who are trained. I thought you were asking more like, okay, this is what an asset inventory document should look like. They don't have the TRs yet. We're waiting on that. So that's one of the things that, after we got trained is for our companies, we actually put together a lot of sample documentation. We kind of just use the high level stuff as kind of a checklist to make sure all of our documents and some of the tools that we're developing, at least follow and have all the components that are necessary for that particular step. In the,
It's got to be something more than say item number 1. This is the manufacturer of the computer. This is the part number of the computer. How many do I have? There's other information that it seems to me that would be.
Yeah, and that's on there. Like it says, make sure you include these items. But there's some
things to capture.
Yeah.
Asset inventory.
Yeah, but they don't give you here's a Word template to do it. That's kind of what I was getting at.
Where it really gets gray is really in the risk assessment. That is where the waters are the most muddy because again, they don't want to say, okay, well, the loss of view is always going to be a risk level 7 because it may not be a risk level 7 for someone who can walk 10 feet that way and they're out manually controlling it, right? So.
Yep. Any other questions? All right. Well, so if you want any more information, especially on the ISA 6443 certificate program, you go to isa.org. And if you want to look at any more of the services that Champion offers, both cybersecurity and system integration based, you go to our website at championtechnology.com. So thanks everybody for listening in, and that's all for us.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Again, next month is ethics presentation, so come join us for that. We have flyers up on the table here, so if you're interested in doing the class in June, we've got flyers on that, and then the Solutions Expo. There's flyers on that that's going on Thursday. If you didn't sign in through Eventbrite, if you sign in through Eventbrite, we've got all your information. You're good to go. If you didn't, please see Bill and just make sure we get your name and email address so we can kind of capture who all showed up here. All right. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.